My security system triggered at 3 a.m., and I watched a murder unfold in real time. Through grainy night vision footage, I watched helplessly from my hotel room as a crew in unmarked trucks systematically dismembered Eleanor, a 200-year-old white oak that had stood on my property since before the Civil War. My great-grandfather had named her after his wife, and generations of my family had picnicked under her sprawling branches. She was the reason I'd fought so hard to keep this land when developers came with seven-figure offers. But now, as I watched from 500 miles away, a team with floodlights and chainsaws worked with military precision in the darkness. Professional, efficient, and utterly merciless. I called the police immediately. Someone's trespassing on my property and cutting down a heritage tree. I explained, my voice shaking. "We'll send someone out," the dispatcher said, but I could hear the lack of urgency. By the time officers arrived 40 minutes later, the crew was gone, and Eleanor was reduced to a massive stump surrounded by sawdust. They'd even hauled away her limbs, and not a single branch remained. I caught the first flight home, arriving to find yellow police tape fluttering around Eleanor's stump. Officer Ramirez was taking photos, looking genuinely disturbed. "I've never seen anything like this," he said, shaking his head. "Professional job." They knew exactly what they were doing. I stood there, staring at the wound in the earth. Eleanor's root system had been treated with some kind of chemical to prevent regrowth. This wasn't vandalism, it was execution. "Any idea who would do this?" Ramirez asked. I had a very good idea. The Lakeside Estates HOA had been trying to pressure me to sell this parcel for years. My 5 acres sat between their luxury development and the main road, forcing residents to take a circuitous route that added 7 minutes to their commute. The HOA had proposed buying just enough land for a direct access road, but I'd refused. Eleanor stood exactly where they wanted to build. Their last offer had come with a thinly veiled threat. "Trees fall all the time," Martin Bishop, the HOA president, had said with a cold smile. "Nature can be so unpredictable." I didn't have proof, but I knew. This had Bishop written all over it. While Officer Ramirez filed his report, I walked the property line, examining the path the crew had used to access my land. That's when I noticed something odd: fresh survey stakes with orange flagging planted in a straight line, cutting across my property. They were dated just 3 days earlier. I followed the stakes to the edge of Lakeside Estates, where a small sign had been posted: "Future site of Lakeside Boulevard extension breaking ground next month." They'd already named the road. They'd already scheduled construction. They'd killed Eleanor because they assumed I'd have no choice but to give in after she was gone. They didn't know who they were dealing with. My grandfather had been a land surveyor, my mother a contract lawyer. I'd grown up listening to dinner conversations about easements, encroachments, and property rights. When I inherited this land, I'd spent months studying every document tied to it since the original land grant in 1823. I knew exactly what I owned, down to the inch. And I knew something the Lakeside HOA didn't, something that would turn their arrogance into their downfall. That evening, I called Diana Chun, my friend who worked at the county records office. "I need everything you've got on Lakeside Estates," I said. "Site plans, surveys, access agreements, especially anything related to their roads." "This about your tree?" she asked softly. News traveled fast in our town. "Yes. I'll send everything tonight," she promised. "And James?" "Make them pay." I stayed up until dawn, poring over documents. By morning, I had my answer and my revenge. Lakeside Estates had a critical vulnerability. Their current access road, the one that meandered through the countryside, adding precious minutes to commute times, wasn't actually on HOA property. The developer had built it 15 years earlier using a temporary access easement across the Johnson family farm. The agreement had a sunset clause. Once the development was completed, the HOA was supposed to secure permanent access within 5 years. They never had. They'd simply continued using the road, and the Johnsons, elderly and unwell, had never enforced the expiration. I checked property records. Old Mr. Johnson had passed away last year. His son, Marcus, had inherited the farm but moved to Arizona. He'd listed the property with a real estate agent just last week. By noon, I was on the phone with Marcus Johnson. I never knew about that easement expiring, he said, sounding surprised. Dad wasn't much for paperwork. The HOA has been trespassing for a decade, I explained. And now they're coming after my land. They cut down your heritage oak, right? It's all over Facebook. Yes, and I want to stop them. I'd like to make you an offer on the portion of your property where their access road runs. Marcus was quiet for a moment. My dad always said your family were good neighbors. Tell you what, let me hear what you're thinking. 2 days later, I owned a very unusual parcel, a 40-foot wide strip of land running exactly half a mile, encompassing every inch of the Lakeside Estates access road. The deal had closed with remarkable speed, with Marcus accepting a fair price and my attorney pushing the paperwork through with emergency priority. I didn't make a move immediately. Instead, I visited Eleanor's stump again, sitting beside it as the sun set. I ran my hands over the freshly cut surface, counting the ring's 27 years of life, ended in a single night of greed. They think it's over, I whispered to her. But we're just getting started. That weekend, I hired a landscaping crew of my own, not for my main property, but for my newly acquired road parcel. By Monday morning, residents leaving for work discovered something bewildering. Teams of workers installing decorative boulders, native plant gardens, and wrought iron benches along both sides of their access road. Martin Bishop arrived within minutes, his Mercedes screeching to a halt. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded, his face flushed. I smiled. "Beautifying my property. Don't you approve?" I thought Lakeside Estates valued aesthetic improvements. "This isn't your property. This is the HOA access road. Actually, it is my property." As of Friday, I handed him copies of the deed and property survey. "I purchased it from Marcus Johnson. You've been using an expired easement for 10 years. The blood drained from Bishop's face as he scanned the documents. "This is a public road," he sputtered. "No, it's a private drive on private land. My land. And I'm developing it as a memorial garden." I pointed to a sign being installed near the entrance. "Eleanor's Path A, Community Green Space. You can't block access to our homes." "I'm not blocking anything. I'm enhancing it. The road will remain open as a pedestrian greenway. It's being converted to a public park, effective immediately." "That's illegal." "Is it?" I pulled out my phone, showing him an email. The County Parks Department is quite excited about my donation. They've been looking for ways to expand green space in this area. Bishop's face contorted with rage. "You vindictive." "Careful," I interrupted. "I have witnesses. And unlike your midnight tree removal, everything I'm doing is fully permitted and completely legal. We'll sue you into oblivion," he threatened. "For what? Converting property I legally own into a public benefit? For donating land to the county? Go ahead. I've already discussed this with 3 attorneys. Your HOA has been trespassing for a decade. You have no easement, no right-of-way, no claim whatsoever." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "But here's what you do have liability. Cutting down a 200-year-old heritage oak without permission is a felony in this state. Trespassing, destruction of property, environmental violations. The police investigation is ongoing, but with the right evidence, people could face serious charges." Bishop's eye twitched. "What do you want?" "Justice," I said simply. "But we can discuss terms once your board acknowledges what happened to Eleanor." As Bishop stormed off, my phone buzzed with a text from Diana. "County meeting approved the Parkway plan. You're clear to proceed." Phase 1 was complete, but I was just getting started. By week's end, Eleanor's Path had transformed from a simple access road into an elongated park. The asphalt remained, but it was now bordered by native wildflower gardens, seating areas, and informational plaques about local ecology. At the entrance stood a sculptural representation of a mighty oak made from reclaimed metal, a memorial to Eleanor that was impossible to miss. Lakeside residents were furious and trapped. The only way in or out of their neighborhood was now a pedestrian greenway. They could walk to their cars, which they now had to park at a makeshift lot I'd arranged near the main road, or navigate the newly narrowed path at 5 miles per hour, carefully avoiding bench-sitting visitors and children with ice cream cones from the small cart I'd licensed to operate there. Their 7-minute inconvenience had become a 40-minute ordeal. The HOA called an emergency meeting, which I attended as an interested community member. The clubhouse was packed, residents shouting over each other as Bishop tried to maintain order. "This is outrageous. I can't get my SUV through without scratching it," one woman complained. "My daughter missed her dance recital because of the bottleneck at the entrance," another added. "My property values are plummeting," a red-faced man yelled. "Who's going to buy a house you can't even drive to?" Bishop, sweating through his dress shirt, tried to project confidence. "We're exploring legal options. Our attorneys believe we have a strong case for necessary access." "Your attorneys are wrong," I said, standing up from the back row. The room fell silent as people turned to look at me. I walked to the front, uninvited, and connected my laptop to the projector. "Let me explain your situation clearly." I outlined the expired easement, my legal purchase, and the county's approval of the park. I showed them exactly why the HOA had no legal remedy. "You have exactly one option," I concluded. "Negotiate with me." "For the access road," Bishop said, trying to regain control. "No," I corrected him. "For Eleanor." I pulled up the security footage from that night, the high-definition images of the crew cutting down my heritage oak. Then I showed close-ups of vehicle license plates and company names on equipment. "I don't know who hired them yet," I said calmly, "but there's a $50,000 reward for information leading to identification of those responsible." People talk when that kind of money is involved. The room had become very quiet. "So here's my proposal," I continued. "The HOA will create a conservation easement on 20 acres of undeveloped woodland at the back of your property land you were planning to clear for Phase 3. You'll establish a $250,000 endowment for maintenance and education. You'll rename your main boulevard Eleanor Way, and you'll publicly acknowledge what was done." "Or," Bishop asked, his voice hoarse, "or Eleanor's path remains a pedestrian parkway permanently, and I continue cooperating with police to identify whoever committed this crime." A woman in the third row stood up. "I'm on the board," she said. "And I want to know, did you authorize the removal of Mr. Harmon's tree, Martin?" Bishop's face went pale. "We should discuss this in executive session. Did you hire someone to cut down a 200-year-old tree in the middle of the night?" She pressed, her voice rising. The room erupted again, but differently now. The anger had a new target. As the meeting devolved into chaos, I packed up my laptop and headed for the door. I'd planted the seeds. Now I just needed to wait. 3 days later, I received a hand-delivered letter signed by 5 of the 7 HOA board members. They accepted all my terms, with one addition. Martin Bishop had been removed as president and was being investigated by the board for misappropriation of HOA funds. The letter included an official apology for the unauthorized and unconscionable destruction of a historic tree. Within 2 weeks, a formal conservation easement was recorded for 20 acres of pristine woodland at the back of the lakeside property. Signs went up marking Eleanor Forest Preserve, and an article in the local paper announced the HOA's commitment to environmental stewardship, carefully omitting the circumstances that led to this sudden passion for conservation. As for Eleanor's path, I worked with the county to modify it. The commemorative aspects remained, including the oak sculpture and educational displays, but the road was widened enough to restore reasonable access to the neighborhood. I maintained ownership but granted a formal easement to the HOA properly documented, with specific maintenance requirements and an ironclad protection clause for the memorial elements. Martin Bishop sold his house and moved away, but not before the County Environmental Authority levied a $125,000 fine against him personally for orchestrating the removal of a protected heritage tree. The tree service company lost its license, and 2 of their employees faced criminal charges. Using part of the fine money, I hired a specialist in old-growth propagation. He carefully extracted living tissue from Eleanor's roots and began the slow process of cloning her. It would take years, but someday, Eleanor's direct descendants would again stand on this land. On the 1-year anniversary of Eleanor's fall, we held a dedication ceremony for the forest preserve. Hundreds of people attended, including many lakeside residents. Where there had been bitterness, something new had taken root, a genuine appreciation for the legacy of a single ancient oak and the ecosystem it had anchored for centuries. Marcus Johnson came from Arizona for the event. As we stood looking out over the preserved woodland, he nodded in satisfaction. "Dad would have loved this," he said. "He always worried about what would happen to the land." "Thank you for helping make it possible," I told him. He shook his head. "You turned a tragedy into something permanent. That's rare." After everyone left, I sat alone beside Eleanor's stump. It had been preserved and turned into a natural monument at the forest entrance, with a bronze plaque telling her story. I placed my hand on the weathered surface, feeling the connection to something that had witnessed centuries of human drama. They'd cut down a heritage oak to build a road. I'd closed a road to create a legacy. In the end, I believed Eleanor would have approved.